Hello, and welcome to this episode of Criminal Justice Natters with me, Ed Johnston. Today, I'm joined by David Rudolf, who many of you will know was the lead defense lawyer in the Netflix documentary The Staircase. So not only do we discuss the Staircase documentary today, we also discuss the HBO dramatization of The Staircase and identify certain elements that are perhaps fiction rather than being based on fact. And we talk about David's book and his podcast with his wife Sonia, Abuse of Power, which is on Audible. And we discuss David being at CrimeCon in London in a couple of weeks' time. So I hope you enjoy the chat and thank you for watching. Thanks for joining us again, David. It's your second time here, so I appreciate you coming back.
Well, I appreciate your having me twice.
Yeah. How are you? You good?
I'm excellent. Thank you very much, Ed.
Good. So there's been a lot of interest in the HBO show. It's kind of brought the Staircase case back to sort of, public attention. So I've got a couple of questions in and around that. And the first one is, when did you hear that a serial was going to be made of this, and what were your initial thoughts and concerns with it?
Well, I had known that Antonio Campos wanted to do something based on the Staircase for a long time. I had a meeting with him back in 08 or 09, and he was interested even then. But it sort of got delayed, and then I finally read about it when I guess Harrison Ford was originally supposed to play Michael Peterson.
Yeah.
And that got, I guess it was in Variety or one of those trade publications, and somebody told me about that, and that was the first I had really heard about it. And then, of course, there was a delay, and then all of a sudden, Colin Firth was playing Michael Peterson. So that's sort of how I heard about it through the media.
Yeah. And were you involved in the sort of portrayal of yourself in the show? Did you meet the actor?
I did meet the actor. He was very kind. He came to Charlotte. He spent a day and a half with me. We talked about the entire case. He took copious notes, and I was quite encouraged by his seriousness and desire to understand the facts. And somehow or another, between then and when it hit the screen, those facts became fiction.
Yeah.
Very disappointing.
And I've seen you describe it as a fantasy in one of the articles about the TV show. What parts are fantasy, or what parts disappoint you?
Well, look, that's just my characterization. I think a lot of it is fantasy of the writers and how they can move a narrative along in a way that engages people who have already seen the actual documentary, which is hard to top.
Yeah.
So, I'll give you some minor examples and then some more important examples. They show me meeting Michael Peterson for the first time in a diner eating a pastrami sandwich. That's just silly. I would never do that. I have never done that. I don't like pastrami. And I had told the actor, Michael Stolberg, the whole story, that I had gone to Michael's house, that we had walked through the scene. So why would they change that? I guess, it's a not so subtle way of saying, oh, gee, this guy's Jewish and from New York. But it was just sort of silly and made me look sort of silly, stupid, for meeting a client in a public place over a sandwich. You just don't do that. The next thing they showed was me and my partner, Tom Maher, standing in the grand jury room while the prosecutor was presenting evidence to the grand jury. That never happens anywhere in the United States. We're not allowed in the grand jury room. So that was just sort of silly. Then, of course, they show me on the phone with Bill Peterson, Michael's brother, and he's saying, "Well, David, we're selling the furniture in order to write you the checks for the appeal." Again, Tom Maher was appointed by the court to do the appeal because Michael was indigent. We never charged him a penny after the trial was over. So why make it seem as though the greedy lawyers are, forcing their client to sell all his furniture in order to pay for the appeal? Just absolute false. And it puts lawyers in a bad light. We're back to being money grubbers in that scene. Those are just three examples. There's many others in terms of my role and what I did. But then, of course, with Michael, they show me having this conversation with him, a heated conversation, where I'm excoriating him for not telling me about Germany until 4 weeks before the trial. And there's a little, thing that goes up. It says 4 weeks before trial. And then it shows me finding out about Germany and sort of yelling at Michael about, why didn't you tell me this? Completely false. We knew about Germany for a year and a half before the trial. Ron and I went to Germany. We investigated that. We brought back reports. So why make it look like Ed hid that from us when in fact he didn't?
Yeah.
That's not fair to Ed. And then I think, the big problem with it is they ascribe motives to Jean de Lestrade, the director, and Sophie Brunet, who was one of the editors, not the only editor, of wanting to help Michael. And the facts are completely jumbled in that thing. Sophie was gone from the project just about the time the trial ended. She didn't edit any of the trial footage. That was done by another person named Scott Stevenson. She had nothing to do with what ended up in those first 8 episodes about the trial. And she certainly, and John certainly didn't have any motive at that point to, quote, help Ed's appeal, because they were not permitted to air the film until after the appeal was over. That was part of our agreement. So on every single level, that was wrong and defamatory. They accused a Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker of being unethical. And I don't know that it gets any worse than that. I just find it inexcusable and immoral, to be honest.
And I think, excuse me, I think the point you make about the impression that this leaves about lawyers to the wider public is very important. I think things like The Staircase and Making a Murderer really illustrates how important lawyers are, the role that they play, everything that they do in the zealous pursuit for their clients' best interests. And I think this really dilutes some of the work that's been undone to show this to a wider audience.
Absolutely. And, the one thing I asked, I didn't care whether they portrayed, the case as favoring Michael, he's innocent, he's guilty. I didn't care. The only thing I really cared about was how they portrayed the criminal defense lawyers, because that was the whole reason why I did the documentary. I wanted people to see what we actually do, as opposed to what popular media portrays us as doing falsely. And Ed, I've got hundreds of emails and text messages saying, wow, I think Michael's guilty, but I have a whole new appreciation of what defense lawyers do.
Yeah.
Which is just amazing to me, and it's exactly the point of the documentary is, let's show people how the criminal justice system actually works.
Yeah.
And let's show people what criminal defense lawyers, whether they're in Great Britain, whether they're in Ireland, whether they're in United States, Australia, this is what we do. not what's on Law and Order Special Victims Unit, right? And instead, and I asked him, I said to Antonio, please, just don't mess that up.
Yeah.
And I said to Michael Stolberg, that's the only thing I care about, Michael. It's the only thing I care about. Just, please make sure that you don't, play into the tropes about criminal defense lawyers. And boom, there I am eating a pastrami sandwich and forcing my client to sell his furniture in order to pay for an appeal. I mean, why? Why do that? So yes, I'm angry.
Yeah, I can see. And one of the things that really struck me in an early episode, I don't know if you would know this, but or you would know the answer to this, was where a senior police officer was leaning on the medical examiner to.
No, that wasn't a police officer. It
It
was
wasn't an officer,
it was the chief medical examiner.
right?
It was the chief medical examiner who comes into Deborah Radish's office,
Yeah,
and she's writing down that the cause of death was loss of blood, and he says to her, "No, no, no, it's I think it's traumatic brain injury, or but you do whatever you want,
yeah,
right?" And in fact, that happened. We
it
didn't
did
know.
happen.
Oh yes, we didn't know it happened until after the trial, when we were going through the police files, and we found a note about that. So think about that for a second, about the corruption of the system, when you have the chief medical examiner of the state of North Carolina coming in and basically trying to create the impression that this was a murder in the autopsy report, as opposed to loss of blood. We don't know what caused the loss of blood. I mean, we know there's lacerations, but to say that's blunt force trauma, you can't say that.
Yeah,
It could be somebody wielding a knife and cutting a scalp. I mean, you just can't say it. And so again, it just sort of illustrates the corruption, I guess, the abuse of power in the system. And as you well know, we have a whole podcast on Audible UK about the abuse of power. And I've written a book that sort of details in many ways how the authorities abuse their power in very specific cases
hmm,
with devastating results.
yeah. We'll come on to the book a bit later, because
Sure.
again, it's a fascinating read, and I found it really sad to read. It was really hard to read. In another thing that cropped up in the show that I've recently watched, because I think we've got a slight delay here in the UK on when we get them. But in the latest episode, Michael intimates that you weren't necessarily 100% focused
Oh,
in terms of your representation, and you're off to get married, and then there's
right.
cross words between the two of you. Is that bullshit?
Complete and utter bullshit, if I can say so, on your
Yeah.
podcast. First of all, I didn't abandon Michael in 2006, which is when that scene is set. First of all, I never abandoned him, but I never even told him I can't go on with this until 2014, because in 2000, I had already, from 2003 on, we did the appeal, we did a second appeal. I filed a motion for appropriate relief, a post-conviction motion. All of that, we didn't charge Michael anything for, and we got him a new trial. So all through that, I was there. I didn't, quote, leave him because I was getting married.
Yeah.
And then we got the new trial, and we tried to work out a an arrangement, a deal, to get the prosecutor to just drop the charges, and we couldn't do it. And that went on for 3 years. And finally, in 2014, it appeared as though we were going to have to go to trial. By that time, I had gotten married. I had a 4-year-old daughter, and I was living almost 200 miles away from Durham, and I couldn't do a trial again. I just couldn't physically. So what I did was I told Michael that, but I also told him that I had contacted a really good lawyer in Raleigh, somebody who I really respected, Mike Clinkerson, and I said, listen, why don't you meet with me and Mike? Let's see if the two of you, get along, and what you think of Mike. And I did that. I facilitated all that, and he was fine with Mike, which he should have been because Mike's a great lawyer. And then I went to the judge and I said, listen, Judge, I can't do this, but Mike Clinkerson is willing to be appointed. And so Mike got appointed to represent Ed. I mean, Mike got appointed to represent Mike, and he did for the next, I guess, year and a half until he had a stroke, which completely disabled him. And at that point, I called Michael and said, "Do you need me to come back in?" And he said yes.
Yeah.
So I went back in and I worked out the deal. So to intimate that at any point I, quote, abandoned him and that we had a fight about that and that he excoriated me about that and made sarcastic comments about enjoy your family.
Mm-hmm.
Michael and I never had a cross word. Never. Not one. I mean, look, people may like him or not like him. I get it. But as far as I'm concerned, he is a stand-up person because never once did he try to blame me for what happened in that trial. Never once. Never once did he assert, ineffective assistance of counsel, which lots of people do.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just found that incredibly offensive, and they knew it wasn't true.
Yeah.
All you have to do is watch the documentary, and it's not true.
Yeah.
So it's very frustrating, Ed. It's really frustrating.
Is there anything you think the HBO show has covered well or done well? Like,
yeah.
Any positives out there?
Yeah, and I'll give them their due about that. I think that in the first couple of episodes, the way they portray the relationship between Michael and Kathleen seems to me, I don't have any personal experience with it, but the way that their friends and acquaintances describe that relationship seems to be fairly accurately portrayed in those first couple of episodes. They laugh, they have a sense of humor. They tease each other. They travel. They drink wine. They get along. Everybody who we talk with who knew that couple, everybody said they finished each other's sentences. They were an amazing couple together. Some people said that that they were jealous of that relationship. So that was fairly unusual because almost always in these cases, some friend or acquaintance says, "Oh, well, I knew, I thought there was something going on."
Yeah.
None of that. So I think that part of the HBO series is well done, and I think the way they portrayed the owl attack was pretty much the way Larry Pollard had articulated it. And I think the facts that they used in that episode to support the owl theory were the facts that you've heard me do it.
I have, yeah.
They're the facts that they could have just been ripping off one of my lectures.
Yeah.
So those are all the right facts.
And whilst I have you on the owl theory, and I'm sure you must be tired of these constant questions about it.
No, it's all right. It's all right.
Mark Gallagher asks, how does the owl theory work and what's the importance of the Christmas decorations on the lawn?
Well, the importance of the Christmas decorations is it serves as a potential explanation of why she would have been outside late at night after leaving the pool. It was December the 8th or 9th. So they were getting ready. They were already putting up their Christmas decorations. They had put up the tree that day. They had the little toy soldiers, on the stairway, the main stairway. So they were already putting up their Christmas decorations. And when we started looking at the photos, I can't remember if it was Michael or one of the kids. Somebody mentioned the fact that they were little reindeer, but they weren't as big as the ones I don't think in the HBO. I think they were much tinier.
Hmm.
And someone mentioned the fact that, hey, those weren't out there yesterday, but they were out there that next morning. So Larry Pollard's theory, and I have no way to prove this or to disprove it, was that after she walked into the house from the pool, she decided, those little things were right by the door where they were going to put them out. So she decided, well, I'll just walk out and put those out before I go to sleep.
Yeah.
And that's what she did. And that the owl may have thought that those were, food, small animals that they prey on. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's what caused the attack. So that was Larry Pollard's theory. I think they depicted it in a way that it could have happened.
Yeah. Because when I first read the theory, because obviously it didn't make part of the show so much because it came so late in the day in terms of the trial, I just thought it was utterly bizarre. And then you think about it, and I've listened to you talk about it, and you think that could have happened.
Yes,
It's plausible.
it is, and that's what I'll say. I can't say that's what happened,
No.
but I can say it's plausible. That's what I
Yeah.
can.
And I wonder. I mean, I don't know if it's come up in other cases. I mean, obviously the North Carolina area where these owls are sort of, where they populate. But I would be fascinated to see what a jury would make of that. Because over here, our owls are small. We don't, excuse me.
Oh no, not true, not true. You have eagle owls over there, which are very similar to barred owls, and
Yeah.
I think I may have shown you an article that came out of maybe it was Scotland, where a guy was knocked to his knees by what
Yeah.
thought was an eagle owl. His head was. I have all the pictures. I'm happy to send them to you if you'd like to.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be fascinated to read them and
Yeah.
see
Oh no,
them.
no, 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 no. And it's happened all over the world.
Yeah.
If you Google barred owls attacking humans or owls attacking humans, if you Google that, you will come up with scores of examples of when owls have done that.
Yeah.
Scores, including a number in the UK.
Yeah. It's fascinating. And Larry just sort of pieced this together by
I
luck,
guess,
or
well, I guess first of all, he lived there, so he
yeah.
knew there were owls around. I would have no way of knowing that there were owls living in those woods. So he knew that, and I guess in looking at the autopsy photos, he always thought, that look, and it does. It looks like
Mm.
a talon
Yeah.
mark, and that's what started him thinking about it. So unfortunately, he didn't come to me with that until literally 2 days before my closing argument.
Yeah. And I suppose you've advanced a whole nother case, a whole other argument. You can't be
Well,
like, actually.
and I had no evidence to support that argument. You
No.
can't just walk in and argue something that you had not produced any
Yeah,
evidence on.
absolutely. And a question from Kathy Hyam, who asks, why did you agree to do the documentary when most criminal defense lawyers try to avoid any comment on an ongoing case?
Well, first of all, I don't generally try to avoid comment on an ongoing case when there's already media being put out by the prosecutor or the police. I think that was the theory 30 or 40 years ago, before we had perp walks and prosecutors and police leaking information and having press conferences. So I think if you don't respond in some way in that situation, you're doing your client a disservice. So that answers one part of that question. In terms of why I agreed to do the documentary, it's as I said earlier, Ed, I was fed up with how people in this popular media were portraying defense lawyers. Michael wanted to do it because he was afraid that the powers in Durham were going to try to railroad him, and he thought having an Academy Award-winning documentary film crew might prevent that. And they agreed to certain conditions that I insisted on to protect the attorney-client relationship. So those three things are really what would cause me to do this. And to be honest, Ed, I don't know that anybody will ever do it again.
No.
It was a risk.
Yeah.
It was a significant risk, and thankfully, it worked out.
Yeah. In terms of the risk, what was the risky elements to doing it?
Well, first of all, people could have decided that what defense lawyers do is really accurately portrayed in the popular media.
Yeah.
So how I did my work was obviously, I think it was captured accurately. But could somebody who wanted to make defense lawyers look bad have done that? Probably so. They could have shown a bunch of scenes of me yelling at the PowerPoint operator.
Yeah.
Uh, so there's always things you do that you sort of look back and you say, maybe I sort of didn't do that right. So that was one risk. But the bigger risk, obviously, was the attorney-client privilege, and making sure that the prosecution could not get a hold of this footage during the trial. So the major risk, the really important risk, because I didn't think I was going to conduct myself in any way that was going to be negative, was the prosecutor getting a hold. For example, if we're meeting with our experts, can you imagine what would happen if the prosecutor got a hold of our meeting there in the stairway where Werner and Henry and Farris are all sort of talking about what's there, and that would give them a tremendous advantage in the trial. So I required two things, and then of course the risk was if the documentary ended up showing Michael in a really negative light. I didn't want it to affect the appeal in any way. Two of the requirements were that they had to send their footage back to France every night, so that if the prosecutor wanted to try to get it, he was going to have to go to The Hague or somewhere to get a subpoena enforced. And number two, that they would not air any of the documentary until all appeals, if any were required, had been finished. So again, that sort of makes the whole idea that somehow they were editing the film, to help his appeal, just all the more ludicrous. And again, Michael Stolberg knew that, and so did Antonio. They both knew it.
Yeah. Another question from Kathy focuses on the discovery of the blowpoke. What was your initial reaction when that was discovered after countless searches?
Well, it's interesting you say that. They had done 3 searches, but at the time they did the searches, they didn't have any idea what they were really looking for. They were looking for something that could have caused, a beating death. And my understanding, I learned afterwards from the person who was there with them doing measurements, that they had actually found the blowpoke where we ended up finding it, but they thought it was a curtain rod. It didn't have the end on it, and it looked just like a curtain rod. So they picked it up. I'm told they even photographed it and put it back where we found it a year later, with spider webs and dead bugs and all that stuff. So they hadn't missed it. They just didn't know what they were looking for, because at that point, Candace had not suggested what the murder weapon was. So that's that. In terms of how I felt, I was really worried at first, until I got down there and saw all the spider webs and dead bugs and where it was. I thought, I hope one of his kids didn't go out and buy a blowpoke and plant it there, because that would have been horrendous for us,
Mm.
just horrendous. So I was actually very worried. And then in the actual documentary, you can see us going down into that dark. It's actually a mechanical room in the back of a garage that's sort of never used. Um, and and we got down there, and you could see all the spider webs and cobwebs and dead bugs, and that's why I called the photographer. Not, we didn't take our own. We called we called a professional photographer on a Sunday morning, uh, and got him to come down there and take all those pictures, because
Yeah.
we didn't want anybody accusing us of having touched anything or changed anything.
Yeah.
So that was the discovery of the blowpoke, and it was, I thought that was a turning point in the case. I didn't understand how they could possibly convict him after we found the blowpoke.
Yeah. And that comes on to a question from Dominic Carrington, who's a man I work with at Northampton. What were your thoughts on the original conviction, and were you surprised? I suspect from your last answer that there was an element of surprise.
No, there was an element of shock, and I think there's a scene in the original documentary where they interview me about that, and I was just blown away. Really, Ed. I was literally blown away. I didn't see how that jury could convict Michael Peterson when we found the blowpoke that the prosecution spent months arguing was the murder weapon.
Yeah. And in regards to how this transpired, sort of after the first trial, the Alford plea is such a strange concept here in like having that in England and Wales. I- are they popular? Do they happen frequently in the US, or is it just a North Carolina thing?
No,
Or
no, it actually, the case that approved them was a North Carolina case that went to the United States Supreme Court called North Carolina versus Alford. The defendant's name was Alford. But no, they're used in many, many, many jurisdictions in the United States. Interestingly enough, when I was speaking in Scotland with a very prominent QC, he was just appalled that I would let my client plead guilty to something that he insisted he hadn't done.
yeah,
Uh, I mean, absolutely, he couldn't even wrap his mind around that. But in the United States, plea bargaining is such a inherent part of our system that people plead to things they didn't do all the time, to get out of jail. Somebody's in jail for a minor larceny, and their bail is set at $250, and they can't make their bail, and they sit in jail for 3 weeks, and they're losing their apartment, and they're losing their job, and they're losing their kids. And a prosecutor offers their lawyer a deal where if they plead to disorderly conduct, they can have time served,
yeah,
or they can continue to plead not guilty, and we'll get to the trial, sometime next year.
yeah.
You know,
Whilst you sit in prison.
right. So
Yeah,
it happens all the time. Normally, it's done sort of in a less um, overt and transparent way. People get up and say, are you in fact guilty of disorderly conduct? Oh, yes, I'm guilty of that, and the plea just goes through.
yeah,
And so it happens all the time in the United States. The Alford plea just makes transparent what otherwise goes on all the time.
yeah. Thank you. Um, and Janice Overlock has asked, what parts of the case were most difficult to reconcile, both professionally and personally?
Um, the only thing that was difficult for me to reconcile was the verdict, to be honest.
Yeah,
I never saw a credible motive. I never saw a credible scenario that explained how or why Michael would have attacked Kathleen after spending a night watching a movie, a romantic comedy, and drinking wine and celebrating the fact that he had just been told that one of his books had been optioned for a movie. None of it made sense to me. And everything that Michael told me, to be honest, checked out.
Yeah.
Everything. So I didn't have any problems. I've said this many times. I believed Michael was innocent when we went to trial, and I
Yeah.
still believe it today.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. One last question about the staircase. It's just popped into my mind now. In the HBO show, there's a scene of Michael entering a store and he's served by Dwayne Deaver. Was that fiction or fact?
I have heard that. I don't think it was a drugstore. I've heard, and I don't know the answer to this. I could certainly ask Michael about it. But I've heard that he walked into some sort of a big store, like I don't know what you have in Great Britain that's similar to our Targets or
Yeah.
but it was a big store, and he saw. I don't think he walked up to a counter, but he saw Dwayne Deaver working in the store,
Yeah.
and obviously didn't want to interchange with him.
No,
So,
understandably.
yeah, so that's my understanding. I don't know if
Yeah.
it's true or not.
Thank you. In terms of your book, American Injustice, was there one particular case that inspired this, or was it just your career of dealing with sort of miscarriages of justice?
When we met, I was on a tour of the UK to talk about the staircase, and I don't know which show you may have caught, but you know, sometimes I was speaking to 1,000 people at a time.
Yeah.
400 or 500 people at a time, and I realized that I suddenly had a platform where I could make people aware of things that I had known for years and years and years, and that they really didn't know, and that they really needed to know about. And so that was the first germ. And now, of course, I think every criminal defense lawyer says, "Oh, I want to write a book about my cases." It's sort of universal. But nobody ever thinks they're going to do it, and frankly, nobody does it. But anyway, that was the first germ of the idea, and from there, Sonia, my wife, and I decided to do a podcast.
Mm.
And so we did the first season sort of on our own with Campfire Productions, which had done An Innocent Man on Netflix.
Yeah.
And we did 10 or 11 episodes, and it was very successful. Won a Webby Award for best, true crime and social justice series. And then Audible UK, interestingly enough, picked it up and bought it. And we've now done 2 additional seasons. Fascinating cases. We've changed the format a little bit, so now we're focusing on a single case each season for
Okay.
episodes, and they're amazing cases. One of which involves a British millionaire who was arrested in Florida for a double murder and convicted and sentenced to death, and has been on death row and now off death row in Florida for 30 some odd years. And Clive Stafford Smith, who's a very prominent human rights lawyer in the UK. And if you haven't spoken to Clive, you should.
Okay.
He and David Wilson are friends. And so Clive represented him. Clive also practiced in the United States as well as in the UK. In any event, it's a fascinating story. It involves the Colombian cartel and Pablo Escobar and all kinds of interesting stuff. Miami during the drug wars in the 80s.
Yeah.
So, and then we did a second one about a North Carolina case. So that was the second piece of it. I realized, well, we can get out to tens of thousands of people through the podcast. And then I decided, well, let's write a book, and not a I'm a great lawyer book, but let's write a book about the human toll that these abuses of power take on individual people, including people like doctors. You
Yeah.
don't have to be a poor minority to suffer at the hands of the abuse of power by the police or prosecutors. And so it took me about a year and a half. I had a associate of mine do a lot of the research. Dug up the old files, reminded me of facts that I had put in the back of my mind, and I tried to write it in a way that wasn't. Please excuse the reference, that it wasn't too academic.
Yeah.
Uh, I didn't want to, burden it with lots and lots of statistics and, analysis of this or that, what criminologists might be interested in. I wanted to tell stories. And fortunately, I had the stories to tell that I think will engage people. And
Yeah.
so I'm hoping it's the kind of book that can educate as well as uh, engage and entertain people. And that's not an easy that's not an
No.
easy fix, but it's been compared to Just Mercy, which I just found incredibly complimentary, because I thought that was an amazing book.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you've written an excellent book. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I would recommend anyone who has even the slightest of interest in criminal justice to read it. Final question. You're off to CrimeCon in London next week.
I am. Are
Over
you
the
going to be
weekend.
there?
I'm not entirely sure. I'm going to try to. Yeah, I'm going to try to.
Let, let, let us know. Let me know. I'll get you in for free.
Oh, superb! Yeah, I'll make that work. So
Yeah, and
what?
there's a VIP dinner that night, Saturday night. So let me know if you can make it. That would be great.
All right, I'll check with my missus, and that sounds much better than what I've probably got planned. So,
All right.
superb. So what are you doing at CrimeCon?
Well, interestingly enough, we are doing a lot of. Well, I'll put it this way: the topic is um, tunnel vision and confirmation bias. We're talking about that, but we're talking about it in the context of the owl theory,
Okay.
because I had tunnel vision when I tried this case. I heard Michael say, "I found my wife. She fell down the stairs." There was no evidence of an intruder that we saw, and so I focused in on the fall theory. And I'm not going to ruin my speech, but there were
Yeah.
certain facts that I simply ignored and made up stories about to explain them away. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about confirmation bias. We're going to talk about how that leads to tunnel vision. And we're going to talk about how that all fits into the owl theory.
Yeah.
And we're going to take a poll before I talk about the owl theory to see how many people believe in it.
Okay.
We're going to do a poll after
Yeah.
and see if we're able to convince people that it's plausible, just
Yeah.
plausible.
Yeah. Perfect. That sounds interesting. Well, I look forward to seeing you next Saturday then.
Excellent. Well, good.
That sounds great. But thank you very much for your time today, David. As ever, extremely interesting, and I really appreciate you taking the time out your day.
Thanks, Ed. Take care.
Cheers. Well, thanks, David, for such an interesting chat. And as I said at the end there, I really appreciate you taking your time out of your day to come and chat to me. And thank you for watching and for supporting the channel. If you have any ideas for another Natter, then please do get in touch. I'd like to thank all the supporters as ever for backing and supporting the show, and you guys for watching and listening. As I say, any ideas for a Natter, please do get in touch in the comments.